Hi guys, I'm Phil Town from Rule 1 Investing. Now, you probably heard people warning that America's debt is getting seriously out of control. But what does that actually mean? Is it just political theater, just trying to get elected? Or is there a real risk that the US government could be forced into a debt spiral, wiping us all out and destroying the world? In this video, I am going to walk through exactly what's going on with the US debt pile and explain why it's posing a little bit of a problem for the future ahead. To understand the US debt problem, the first thing you got to do is look at how the government actually gets money and spends it. Now, some people think the government's just like a business. It has income and expenses. You could think of it like that. It's not a terrible way to think of it, but it really isn't. It's a government. It doesn't have income. Its money comes from money that it takes from other people who made money. In a republic, these are taxes, right? And these taxes are imposed by the people on themselves through their representatives. Problem is that the taxes that people have agreed on are not nearly sufficient today to pay for the things the people's representatives have voted to buy. So things like healthcare, defense, Social Security, and other more questionable expenditures. In 2024, the government collected $5 trillion and spent $7 trillion. Which means that for every $10 we pay in taxes, we spend 14. And every year it gets worse. Why? Why don't we just fix it by raising taxes? Okay, great idea. In fact, the idea of raising taxes has occurred to other people quite a lot. It's very popular with the 16% of Americans who pay no income or payroll taxes at all. Higher taxes are also quite popular with the additional 24% of Americans who pay payroll tax but no income tax at all. And that means about 40% of the voters have figured out that they can vote to increase other people's income taxes without increasing their own. And while the other 60% actively vote to keep their own taxes down, many of them will vote for higher taxes on the richer people. The top 1% of earners now pay, as a result of all this voting, 46% of all the income taxes. So, okay, well, they're rich. Why not just hit them up for more? And here's why not. Because it's been tried, and it didn't go well. It turns out the top 1% are rich people who can hire professionals to help them avoid higher taxes. And if they can't avoid higher taxes, guess what? They can leave the country, and they do. When Britain had 95% tax rates in the 1970s, 95% of incremental income, every major British rock band left the country, including the Beatles, the guys who wrote Taxman. 1 for you, 19 for me, because I'm the taxman. Now, when rates get too high, rich people stop investing and start buying more yachts. Last year, with tax rates at 37%, the collected income tax amounted to 8% of GDP. But when America had 91% tax rates in 1960, the collected income tax accounted for 7.9% of GDP. In other words, despite the big, gigantic difference in tax rates, the government's share of GDP from income taxes stayed about the same. So if raising taxes on the rich doesn't actually bring in any more money, what's the alternative? Well, could we try some fiscal discipline and spend less? Apparently not. In a republic, we elect politicians. They love their jobs. They can do some good for some folks, and their lives are interesting in Washington, D.C., and they get a killer retirement. They want to get reelected. And the best way to do that is to be able to point to all the things they did for their people. Now, mostly these things are things that brought money in for their constituents. I got the government to pay for a huge data center right here in hometown America, so reelect me so I can get more for you. All the representatives know that they have to bring home the bacon, right? So they all play a little game of you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. When it comes to keeping spending under control, there's no question that in a republic like ours, our representatives are much more interested in getting reelected than saving the country. If they can't collect more money from taxes and they can't cut spending or they won't get reelected, then where in the world is the money going to come from? All right, there's only two choices left to cover that 40% of excess spending, and that is borrow money or print it. And they do both. When they borrow it, what they do is issue government bonds, which are essentially IOUs. They IOU to whoever will lend them the money. The total debt that we owe right now as a country is $37 trillion. So that means they've issued $37 trillion of IOUs in the form of government bonds. Now, mutual funds and ETFs have about 15% of those. Individual investors are holding about 20%. Institutions like banks and pension funds, state funds, insurance funds, they've got 21%. The Fed borrowed from itself, essentially printing money, and has 14% of the debt. So that's about 70% so far. Now, the biggest lenders to the U.S. are people and governments from outside the U.S. because, compared to their own country, lending money to the United States looks like a safe bet. Now, out of that $37 trillion, foreigners are owed 30% of it. So what's the problem with this? Hey, everything's cool. We just keep doing it. Well, when you're borrowing trillions of dollars, you have to pay interest to the lender or they won't lend it to you. And that adds up fast. Remember, this isn't a one-off thing. The government is borrowing more money every single year. So over time, the national debt grows. And last year, the national debt grew by $2 trillion. That means the government has to pay more interest every year. That's the basic framework. But why is it becoming such a big problem? Well, there are actually two problems the U.S. government is facing right now that are unfortunately colliding to make one really big future mess. The first problem is the U.S. has spent more than it takes in for 25 years in a row. Every single year, it has had to borrow more. Now it's $37 trillion in debt, but that's growing at almost 6% a year. If it keeps growing at that rate, in a bit over 10 years, this debt is going to be at $70 trillion. Now, this is where it gets really sticky. The interest on $70 trillion at current interest rates, 5%, is $3.5 trillion. That's 70% of what the U.S. government is collecting from taxpayers. What's left over after paying interest might cover defense and most of Medicare, but you can forget about Social Security benefits and everything else the government is spending on. The problem is they can't forget about that. They got to keep spending that money too, or they're going to get unelected, which means more borrowing. It's like you're trying to pay off a giant credit card by taking out new credit cards at twice the interest rate, and if that spiral isn't brought under control, then lenders are going to lose confidence and they're going to cut up your credit cards. Now, in the government's world, that means their ability to manage its finances and demand that you pay a low interest rate could start to fray at the edges. That will cause borrowing costs to rise even further and to push the system to the brink. If, for example, lenders won't lend money to the U.S. government unless they get paid 10% instead of 5%, and believe me, it's been a lot higher than that in my lifetime, the interest payment would double from $3.5 trillion to $7 trillion. That's more than all the taxes we get and leaves no money for anything else. If you can't pay the interest, you can't borrow. At that point, the government will have no choice. The Fed's going to go to Plan B. They will just make an entry in the accounting ledger for $7 trillion. And like magic, $7 trillion is available to lend to the U.S. government in exchange for a treasury bond with low interest rates. Ta-da! Problem solved! Woo! Well, not exactly. They just print whatever money they need to cover the interest payments and everything else. And, the debt problem is handled, right? I mean, because we just owe money to ourselves. But another problem, way worse, is coming like a freight train right at us. And that is called inflation. You print a bunch of paper money, it doesn't make the government suddenly richer. All it does is increase the money supply so that more money is chasing the same amount of stuff. And that makes prices go up and up and up. And eventually, keep doing it, it will take $1 million to buy a loaf of bread. And remember that America is the major consumer of the rest of the world's stuff. And if we can't pay for it, because it's $1 million to buy a loaf of bread, they go broke too. Old saying is, America gets a cold, the world gets pneumonia. So you imagine what would happen if every country in this downward economic spiral gets far worse than America, we end up in something far worse than the Great Depression, and war becomes inevitable, maybe even World War III. Now, this is an Armageddon scenario and is exactly the kind of scenario Elon Musk has been warning about, and Ray Dalio warning about it. And it's a big reason why these guys have backed the creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE for short. Musk has been increasingly vocal about his concerns over the U.S. deficit. He sees it not just as a budgeting issue, but as a long-term existential threat to the entire country. This is really scary if you really think deeply about it. In interviews and online posts, man, he's emphasized the importance of getting the government's financing back to a break-even where spending matches income before the compounding effects of debt and interest spiral out of control, you guys. So what does all this mean for us as investors? Oh, man. It means you better know what you're doing and you better start learning because just sticking money in the market isn't going to work anymore. The numbers will speak for themselves. The U.S. government is sitting on $37 trillion in debt. It's running massive deficits with interest rates rising. Cost of servicing the debt is ballooning faster than ever before. And then the debt spiral starts, then confidence erodes, borrowing gets harder, they start printing money like crazy, and the entire world economy blows apart. The scariest part? No real plan to fix it at all. But as investors, we've got to focus on what we can control, and we can control a lot. We can't fix Washington, but we can still invest intelligently in businesses that not only survive, but thrive even through this dismal scenario. Look, some investors got really rich in the Great Depression, including Warren Buffett's mentor, Ben Graham, the guy that started all this Rule 1 investing strategy. Great businesses with strong fundamentals, great management, and real staying power that can raise prices with inflation are the opposite of fragile. They're not just survivors, they can thrive in any environment. And in uncertain environments like this one, you get opportunities that just appear out of nowhere if you know where to look. Now, if that's something you want to get better at, you guys, I would love to invite you to my upcoming 3-day investing workshop. We're live September 12th to 14th, Peachtree City near Atlanta, Georgia. We're going to be live with me and my coaches. You're going to learn how to analyze businesses and value stocks and turn macro chaos into long-term opportunity to create generational wealth. The time is now, so grab a free ticket. Just click on the link in the description. We don't sell anything at this workshop. We're just there to teach you. You can grab that link in the pinned comment, or you can scan the QR code on the screen, and we would love to see you there, guys. Take advantage of this. Thanks for watching. Now go play.